Hello, good afternoon and welcome to this AHDB webinar. My name's Scott Raffle. I'm here as your chair this afternoon. I work for the AHDB and we're here to talk about raspberry varieties, new raspberry varieties. AHDB is one of a number of industry partners who fund the UK Raspberry Breeding Consortium at the James Hutton Institute. And the purpose of this afternoon's webinar is to ensure that you're all fully acquainted with some of the new varieties that are coming out from that programme. So a little bit of housekeeping information for you. All of our delegates are muted, so you can see us, we can't see you, you can hear us, and we can't hear you. But don't worry, there is an opportunity for you to type in questions during this afternoon's webinar. And on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see a little mock-up of the panel. And if you have a look down on the right-hand side, you'll see a little grey bar that says questions. If you want to submit questions, please just type them into that box, and I will read them out at the end of the webinar. We will deal with those all at the end. I'm sure there will be time to cover the majority. Now, I should just say the recording this afternoon will be made available next week. So the whole of the webinar is being recorded. For those of you who can't watch the whole thing, or if you've got friends or colleagues who would like to watch on another day, you can do so. It will be made available on our horticulture website at that address, ahdb.org.uk/webinars, and that should be available from next week. Now, those of you who are interested in basis and Noroso points, you should have been prompted to supply your registration details before the start of the webinar. If you haven't done so yet or weren't able to do so, you can submit those to my colleague, Maya Kotecha. It's maya.kotecha@ahdb.org.uk, or if you forget her address, send it to me, scott.raffle@ahdb.org.uk, and we'll make sure they get added to the list. So a little bit about this afternoon's programme. We have two speakers for you this afternoon. Louise Sutherland will kick us off. She's going to be talking about the process of raspberry breeding at James Hutton Limited, how it all works and what our aims and aspirations are for the programme. And then we'll be hearing from Nikki Jennings herself, the head breeder at the James Hutton Institute for Raspberries. She will be talking through the new varieties that are coming out and giving you more details about some of those. So Louise Sutherland will kick us off. Louise is somebody I know very well. She's worked in the industry for many years as a technologist. She worked for Marks and Spencer's for many years. She is now an independent consultant working in the fresh produce industry. Louise worked very closely with me and my colleagues Rachel and Katia at AHDB as the chair of the AHDB soft fruit panel for 4 years, making sure that we were targeting our research in the right areas for the industry. We're very pleased that Louise also chairs the Raspberry Breeding Programme at James Hutton Limited. Louise, tell us all about the programme and how it works for the industry.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, Scott. If Maya could give me control, that would be brilliant. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Looking forward to telling you a little bit about raspberry breeding at James Hutton. The programme is really unique. It builds on 60 years of raspberry breeding at James Hutton that started back in the 1950s when sales of fresh raspberries were limited, and this was the kind of site that you'd see with the focus on machine harvesting. And at that point, James Hutton was breeding varieties specially to be harvested by machines, with Glen Clover released in 1969, especially for that market. Since the 1950s, there have been 21 different cultivars released. Glen Lion was released back in 1991, but the real step change came with release of Glen Ample in 1996 that came to dominate retailer fresh raspberry sales, and certainly was a major feature on Marks and Spencer's shelves for a number of years with its big fruit and good eating quality. The Raspberry Breeding Consortium, or RBC as we affectionately call it, came into being in 2002 as this fresh raspberry market was expanding at pace and the industry was being transformed. James Hutton, together with AHDB and the fresh market industry, realised that fantastic eating quality new varieties were needed to drive this vibrant market, and that James Hutton's broad rubus germplasm was an expertise in plant science could deliver these new varieties for the industry. At that point, there was no source of funding available, and so the consortium came together. Since 2002, we've had 4 different raspberry breeding consortia, and our current one, running from 2019, will continue to 2024. The RBC has released a number of important varieties over the years. Most recently, we've had Glen D in 2014 and Glen Karen in 2018. And we are delighted to present 3 new varieties. Sky, which is a long cane raspberry suited to double cropping, high yield potential, quick and easy to pick and plug, and with a sweet, aromatic, low acidity flavour. Louise, to the left of it, is even larger, bright red and glossy in the punnet, very sweet and aromatic, delicious. And perhaps our most exciting development is Glenmore at the end of this slide, which is the first variety that has the resistance marker for Phytophthora. And this is the result of fundamental science being conducted at James Hutton over the years, having real and tangible benefits for the breeding programme. The RBC is now able to offer this first in raspberry breeding to its members and to AHDB levy payers, thanks to the contributions of the AHDB to the breeding programme. Material is available for trialling of these 3 new varieties, Louise, Sky and Glenmore, and Nikki will tell you how to get hold of some later on in the presentation. Our current consortium has 16 members, as I said, including the AHDB and the Scottish Government, and a range of marketing groups, POs, propagators from the UK and Europe. Our breeding objectives are, firstly, to select high quality, fresh market cultivars suitable for low input systems with reduced labour costs. And in light of the current labour crisis, we're particularly focused on large fruit, high yield, easy to pick. And we've got an eye to the future as well, with the prospect of robotic harvesting. And I think this is where the heritage of the breeding programme with its machine harvesting base will be so invaluable. But we never forget that each new variety still has to deliver lovely, glossy, pale coloured fruit with great taste and good shelf life. Our second objective is to develop robust hybrids with improved pest and disease resistance, especially to Phytophthora root rot. And the priorities for these pests and diseases come from the AHDB soft fruit panel priorities. And of course, we have our first in terms of a variety, commercial variety with the Phytophthora root rot marker, Glenmore, recently released. Moving on to objective 3 is our active deployment of marker-assisted selection strategies to speed up the breeding process. This is a real USP of the RBC, because it's the only near-market raspberry breeding programme that's actively using molecular markers to screen for new genotypes. Really importantly, this has enabled us to reduce the time it takes to produce and select new varieties from about 14 years to 7 or 8. We are screening, each year we are screening for not only resistance to Phytophthora using the RUB118B marker, where we have 40% of our crosses with at least one parent with this marker. But we're also using markers to screen for a range of characteristics, including shelf life, fruit size, and yield. All these objectives are reviewed annually by the consortium to ensure that we stay focused on industry needs. We have 3 consortium meetings each year. A summer meeting in July at James Hutton, where members get to see the most advanced and promising floricane selections in replicated plots. Members also get to see the best selections showcased in our demonstration tunnel that was made possible by support of a number of horticulture equipment companies, for which we're very grateful. This demonstration tunnel gives members the opportunity to see the plants, their habit, the fruit presentation, for themselves and to view their performance against industry standards. It's followed by tasting sessions where members taste and rank these new selections against industry standards for appearance, flavour and texture. We also have an autumn meeting, which is kindly hosted by Jensen in Holland. This is based around our new primer cane selections, with opportunities again to see the plants in a tunnelled environment, as well as assess and taste the fruit. Our third meeting of the year is our annual meeting in November, where Nikki updates everybody on the results of the year's work. She will give us the results potted down of the 60 to 80 crosses that she has completed in a year, which will generate 8,000 to 10,000 new genotypes. An update on the molecular work and what new characteristics we are screening for and how that validation work is going. We will also hear the results about how Nikki and her team have got on assessing 8,000 genotypes each season. And these are across single plant pots for the earliest material, through replicated plant pots for the most promising selections, to the most advanced ones in our demonstration tunnel. Nikki tells us how they performed in terms of resistance to pests and diseases, as well as plant habit characteristics, size, yield, flavour, shelf life, yield components and productivity. The RBC then reviews the data from these selections, along with the results from members' on-farm trials, to decide which selections to take forward. We also hear about the chilling requirements of promising new selections. Nikki and her team work hard every year to work out what those requirements are, so that we know that with new varieties, exactly the amount of chilling they have to maximise bud break and yield. One of the interesting things that this has shown is that the breeding programme contains a robust and diverse germplasm, which has different chilling requirements that can be selected to meet industry requirements, particularly important as climate change impacts our growing environments. As well as the 3 consortium meetings, there is an executive to help with the day-to-day running of the RBC, and these are elected on an annual basis and include representatives from marketing groups, POs, propagators, James Hutton, with me in the chair. In a normal year, growers get to see and taste the latest selections at Fruit Focus and Fruit for the Future, and we very much hope that that will be a possibility this year, as being able to welcome you to James Hutton as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Louise. A very comprehensive outline of the aspirations and the way the system works. We're not going to take questions just now, Louise, but stay with us and perhaps we'll take some questions at the end once Nikki's given her presentation, and we can have maybe a bit more of a chat at that point. So thank you for now, Louise. And we now move to Nikki Jennings. Nikki, I hope, is known to most of you. Nikki has been working at the James Hutton Institute for 25 years. She's been making crosses for all of those 25 years. She was an assistant, but for the last 22 of those 25 years, she's been leading the research and the breeding program into new raspberries. Nikki, tell us all about these latest ones that you've come up with.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you very much to Louise, who gave a very nice introduction and comprehensive background to the programme. Can you see my slides? Am I sharing my slides with you?
Yes, we can, Nikki, they're all there.
Fab. As Louise mentioned, we've released 3 new cultivars just last year, so I'll focus on these for today, but I'll also highlight some of the new promising selections that we've identified for on-farm trials. And I'll describe some of the work and ideas that we're planning to progress the programme in the future. So the 3 new cultivars represent a series of firsts for us. It's our first new primer canes released from the programme, Lewis and Skye. And the first variety to be released with the root rot marker, as Louise mentioned, this is the early Floricane Glenmore. We released them in early April last year, and plants are now available to buy from licensed propagators, which I'll speak about later on. So we'll start with the primocane varieties. Louise is an early primocane variety with fruit starting in late summer, early autumn, between polka and Imara kind of season. It has beautiful, large, red, bright red fruit, looks beautiful in a punnet, very nice and glossy. Also a really nice flavour, very sweet, aromatic, quite juicy with vanilla notes, and the low acidity that the retailers are looking for. It's also very easy and quick to plug from the receptacle, makes picking very easy, and it fills the punnets very quickly. The plant itself, it has moderate vigour, it's quite a sturdy looking plant, it's got a nice compact upright habit. And here's just a little bit of data that we took from the breeding plots last year, comparing Louise with Skye and Kwanzaa and Quayle. We consider Kwanzaa to have a very good quality in our breeding plots, and it really is good competition for finding a good primocane. So if a selection or a cultivar is better than Kwanzaa in our plots, we consider it pretty good. So Louise starts early in both the summer crop and the autumn crop, has a good size, has a really high Brix, particularly last year in the summer season. It had a really sweet aromatic flavour. The potential in the crop we see in that early autumn crop, because it starts fruiting so early in the autumn, it doesn't produce that much of a crop in the summer, but the fruit that it does produce in the early summer, it really is very nice quality, and it outperforms Kwanzaa and Quayle for both flavour and shelf life. Our second primocane is the late fruiting Skye. It has quite a bit later autumn season, somewhere between Quayle and Kwanzaa starting to fruit, but we see the best potential in Skye as a long cane double cropping type. Seems very well suited to double cropping. It has very vigorous long cane with a very short internode length, and it has a lower chill requirement, and we see that as good bud break down the cane in the spring, and it has a very high yield potential, There's a high number of laterals per cane with that good bud break and short internode length, but also a very high number of fruit per lateral. And like Louise, it's very quick and easy to plug from the receptacle and fill the punnets quickly. It has to be picked at a pink stage to achieve that nice uniform storage colour, but it is very easy to pick at this pink stage. And similar to Louise, it has a low acidity and is sweet and is fruity and aromatic. And we see this good quality consistent in both the summer crop from the long cane and the late autumn crop. It also has a good balance of yield in both these crops. And again, just a little bit of comparative fruit data from our breeding plots. Skye has a much later season. It was 3 weeks later than Louise in the autumn last year, not starting till the middle of September, which was a good week after Kwanzaa last season. Very good fruit size, really firm, real long shelf life, and it's probably about the best shelf life we have in our primocane germplasm at the moment. Also, the flavour is probably not quite as great as Louise, but it's still very good. and both shelf life and flavour are better than Kwanzaa. And here's just a comparison of picking profiles for both Skye and Lewis for both the summer crop last year and then the autumn crop later in the season. In the bar charts at the top, it shows total yield for both the summer and autumn crop, and Lewis and Skye are the red bars compared with Kwanzaa, Quayle and Polka. And the line graphs below show the picking profiles for Lewis and Skye compared with Kwanzaa. So you see in both the summer and the autumn crop, Lewis, which is the red line, crops early. In the summer, it's a very short, sharp crop, whereas Skye has, in the blue, has a real high yield that picks for a much longer season, way past Kwanzaa. And then starting again in mid-September, it has produces this lovely crop in the autumn. And at the end of the pick, we finished picking at the end of October. Skye still had a lot of green fruit left on the crop, so we see it with a higher yield potential in a warmer climate. So the third variety I'm going to speak about is Glenmore, the first variety with the root rot resistant marker. It is an early floricane type. It starts cropping in early summer, and we first looked at it in the soil many years ago, and we saw that it had no symptoms of root rot in either rep in the soil plot that we knew was badly infested with root rot over 6 seasons. No symptoms at all. It's actually a floricane cross with a primicane, but it combines the best of both plant habits. It has a lower chill requirement compared with standard floricanes, and it only produces a small amount of tip fruit in the autumn, so it leaves this lovely long cane to crop in the summertime. So it's a good early floricane. It's very productive and it has a very long season. It produces these late lower laterals in the canopy that provide real large fruit late in the summer season. It has more of a traditional raspberry flavour than Lewis and Skye, but it has these coconut notes in its flavour, which sounds a little bit odd, but it does work, and it demonstrates really good shelf life. We saw it in the soil, cropping for all of those years in the breeding plots. But a couple of years ago, we put it in coir, and we see that it demonstrates very good quality and yield in coir also. And here's just a little bit of data from the plots last year compared with Glenample and Glencairn. It's quite a bit earlier than both of them, with a decent fruit size and a high Brix. And again, here's the cropping profile from our breeding plots of Glenmore. It's not our highest yielding type, but it does yield significantly more than Glenample, which is still a good benchmark for productivity in our breeding plots. The line graph on the bottom right-hand corner just shows the cropping profile. Glenmore is in red, Glenample is in green, and Glendee, our late variety, is in dark blue. So you see it has a nice spread of season and over a very long season, with the best of the crop by mid to late July. So all 3 of these varieties are available from licensed propagators. They're available this year from Jensen in Holland. He has plug plants available now with long cane from late autumn later on this year and into next year. RW Walpole will have plug plants of all three available from spring next year. So we have many promising selections in the pipeline, too many to mention individually. So here's just some nice pictures of some really good selections we have identified for on-farm trials over the last couple of years. This slide shows a pair of selections that are well suited to long cane production. The one on the left hand side is quite an old selection for us, 0658C5, that we have reselected for retrialing on growers' trials, and we should start to see results from this season onwards. It's consistently very high yielding with a very large fruit size in the breeding plots at the Institute, and we have the luxury of several years of seasons in the soil and in coir and in different tunnel systems and in a long cane system, and it performs very well year on year. It's also has very good eating quality, and visitors really and taste panels really like the flavour profile, which came out in an Innovate project that Julie Graham's group ran a couple of years ago, comparing our selections with some retail samples. This one consistently came out top. Plants are available from spring this year to trial from Jensen, and he'll have some long cane available next year, but we'll see some early results on the new farm trials from this season onwards. On the right hand side, we've got a much newer selection, RBC 19P17, which we think will make a great long cane type, since there's more emphasis on the breeding programme for producing types suited to long cane production. It's actually 0658C5, a daughter plant that's been crossed with Kwanzaa to produce this lovely heavy cropping long cane type. It has beautiful bright red fruit, very similar look to Kwanzaa, that really luminous red colour, very bright and glossy, and it has a really good shelf life, particularly last season in the breeding plots. These have been identified for trials. Also, we have many exciting primocane selections in the programme, and we're starting to see an increased proportion of these selections that combine promising fruit quality traits with the root rot marker, and these are now trickling through into the on-farm trials, and I think we have 7 selections in trials that have the root rot marker, and these are some really nice photographs from the Berry Garden trial at Clock House in Kent. They produced some really nice initial results last season, and we'll have more results to see from this trial in the coming season. So over the last 5 years, we've made some progressive changes to the breeding programme. We want to breed new cultivars that are resilient and adaptable to environmental change, whether that's climate change or a change in geographical location, or even just a shift in production system. We want to give growers more information on new cultivars at the time of release. So since 2015, we've been conducting a dormancy experiment. After seeing some bud break problems in recent releases at that time, where we saw very poor bud break with apparent lack of chill and bud break too early on some genotypes. And we realised, once we started looking at this, we realised that we had a real broad genetic range of chill requirement in our germplasm. So we set up a dormancy experiment based on the existing blackcurrant dormancy experiment to compare chill requirement of our new selections compared with older existing, more established varieties. We now do this on an annual basis as we introduce new promising selections from the programme. We'll continue to do this. It wasn't so long ago when we screened all of our seedlings in the soil before progressing to pots at a later stage in the breeding process. So we're now increasing quite dramatically the amount of early stage breeding material into pots for early assessment to try and identify something suited to pot production at a very early stage. In the last couple of years, more of our breeding focus has been to identify types more suited to long cane production, like I mentioned, since long cane production is definitely on the increase. So whether it's primocane or floricane types, we're looking at its potential as a long cane type. Louise mentioned the primocane trial at Jensen in Holland to assess early stage material in a warmer climate, or a climate warmer than Scotland anyway, in case we miss something promising in our in case we miss later primocanes in our seedling field in Scotland, when the day length starts to reduce and the temperature starts to drop in the autumn. So this is a great opportunity for us. Also, Louise mentioned the demonstration plot where we're showcasing our best selection in a more commercial system, and this has been a real hit with the visitors, particularly in 2019. And we hope we get a little bit more, some more visitors this year, this coming season. That would be fantastic. So we think we've made real good progress with resistance to root rot, the large raspberry aphids, and specific cane disease, spur blight, and cane botrytis. And then the last 6 months or so, the consortium members wanted us to generate a plan for breeding resistance or tolerance to other pests and diseases to help reduce reliance on chemicals. So we created a database of important pathogens based around the AHDB Pest and Disease Risk Register. And we added our knowledge from the breeding programme. We're well aware of genetic differences for a number of pathogens within our germplasm, and also knowledge from GHI projects such as the Innovate Physical Fruit project that Julie Graham ran a few years ago. So we sent this database to the industry partners who gave us feedback on which pathogens they'd like us to focus on, and we asked them to pick their top 3. So they gave us feedback and they'd like us to focus on 2-spot spider mite, post-harvest botrytis, and powdery mildew. So we will start using parental material with tolerance to these pathogens this season. So we want to continue to progress the breeding programme, and we'll have a few ideas that we'd like to implement or have started implementing now and in the next year, including new markers from Julie Graham's group, who has a suite of markers, some of which are ready to use or in the process of validation. And we are currently in the process of running markers for fruit size and shelf life alongside the root rot marker, and the JHL diagnostic unit is doing that for us just now. Markers for yield and yield components are in the process of validation. And also at the end of last year, our PhD student, Luca Scolari, identified markers for crumbly fruit. And this is also in the process of validation, which is very exciting. We've created an association mapping population, which consists of a broad population of about 300 plus individuals, excuse me, that represent the whole of our raspberry germplasm that we have on site, including named varieties from our programme and other programmes, selections and small related families. And this will help us validate markers a bit faster in the future. Dominic Williams in our JHI fruit group is developing a multispectral imaging tool, both as a phenotyping tool and a way of identifying pathogen problems before they're visible to the naked eye, before we can see them on the plant. He's making very exciting progress in raspberry on that. We're also dabbling with the idea of speed breeding on a small scale, using different controlled environments based on the site at James Hutton. And for the last year or so, we've been experimenting with raspberries in hydroponics in the glasshouse with the help of the glasshouse staff. We're also starting to look at seed germination and ways of speeding up the process between crossing, seed germination and screening the leaf material with the markers and getting the plants into the field and into the next generation of crossing. So that's been really interesting also. The next few ideas we'll need extra funding for, but we'd really like the opportunity to look at large-scale grower trials of the advanced selections before commercialisation and give the growers a bit more information on fertigation, on agronomic requirements at the time that we come to release a variety, because we're really quite missing that at the moment. We'd also really like to expand this dormancy experiment into a bigger project that investigates optimum chill and storage temperatures and requirements. This would be a really interesting project to do, particularly with increase in long cane production. Robotics for raspberry picking, this might take more than a year of an idea. It seems a long way off, but we consider our germplasm as potential candidates for a project based around robotics, based on the derivative traits from our machine harvesting days all those years ago that Louise mentioned. So that's really kind of it. With a lot of help from the AHDB and the industry, we conduct lots of events and are given a regular platform to disseminate our results and show off all of our new selections and new varieties. So, and of course, with the past year, everything is turned to video and moved into online on social media. So we're on all the usual social media channels, thanks to our marketing manager, Laura Patterson, who's also recorded lots of videos from lots of our fruit projects at the Institute. So it's thanks to her we have a real online presence now. The results from our varieties can be found at Hutton Limited website. And also, if you're interested in trial material, Leslie Beaton has our commercialisation manager. She deals with all the trial and testing agreements, and please contact her if you have any questions on or are interested in trialling the material. And finally, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Nikki. Can I invite Louise to come back in and join us as well at this point, and then we can maybe have a bit of a chat and deal with some questions. Just a reminder to those of you out there, if you've got any questions about anything that Louise or Nikki have been talking about, please just submit them via the grey bar on the right-hand side of your control panel, and submit them, and I'll pose them to Nikki and to Louise. I'm going to kick off first for the first thing to say, just on that last slide about future aspirations. You talked about Long Cane Storage Project. Just to say, we at AHDB have been in discussion with Nikki about funding this work, and we have plans to do so, and we would like to start this later this year. This partially depends on the future of the horticultural levy, but if there's any scope for us to do that work in future, we would hope to do it. But obviously, pending announcements by the government minister at the moment on the future of AHDB horticulture. Can I just throw in something to start the questions rolling, really? First of all, to perhaps to Nikki. With Glenmore, I'm going to show my age here. I remember the variety Glenmoy, not Glenmore, Glenmoy, M-O-Y, which was a very early variety, and I always saw that as being the early starter in the summer fruiting or floricane varieties. Where would you say Glenmore compares in season to Glenmoy?
Oh, that's a good question, Scott. It's really quite similar, although we don't have any Glenmoy in the tunnel beside Glenmore. It's probably similar. It's probably earlier than Glenlyon. So yeah, probably Glen Clover, Glenmoy type of season. And I seem to remember the varieties were swapped in England. Glenmoy came before Glen Clover. In England and Scotland, Glen Clover always came first. So yeah, it's definitely comparable, and the most productive part of the yield is in those first 2-3 weeks in July. Yeah, it's a really cracking early variety. We don't see the early problems with other varieties in Scotland that we have with some poor fruit set and poor flavour early on. It really starts with a bang.
Which I think is all very exciting, because I think for many years with the summer fruiting or floricane varieties, we moved back slightly. When Moy disappeared from the industry because of its susceptibility to root rot, we ended up starting with Glen Ample, which was that little bit later. So I think this is really exciting to have something as early as this coming in. And then a related question or a comment perhaps, I think breeders have always said to me in the past how difficult it is to breed for earliness and combine earliness with high yields. I don't know why that should be. I don't know if any of you know why that should be, but you seem to be achieving it. I think, Louise, you would agree with that. How big are, I mean, that's the case with both Glenmore and Lewis. You've got a primocane variety and you've got a floricane variety, which both seem to be yielding well, and they both seem to be early season. How big a breakthrough is that for the industry, Louise?
I think it's really significant. Nikki has been working really hard, and I think all that hard work is now coming to, if you'll pardon the pun, fruition, with some really exciting different characteristics. And Nikki is working to make sure that as many of the desired characteristics for the industry are coming together in individual varieties. So we're not talking about now one variety that has one desired characteristic, but as you can see from what Nikki has shown you, we've got lovely large fruit that help growers with productivity. We've got great looks, great flavour, great shelf life, and now we're adding in additional layers of pest and disease resistance. We're adding early seasonality in. I think it's a really exciting time, Scott.
Yep. It certainly seems to be. Okay, well, we're getting a number of questions coming in, so I think you're going to be kept busy for the next few minutes. You mentioned, Nikki, about trialling certain selections at Clockhouse Farm near Maidstone in Kent. We have a question about experiences with any of these new varieties in the southern parts of Europe. Have you got any experience? Have any of these reached the shores of the Mediterranean yet, or is that still to be done?
The new selections or the new varieties? Sorry.
I think well, particularly the new primocane varieties is the question being asked. Sorry, I should have clarified that.
Well, we've had Lewis and Skye in trials in Spain, and we've had mixed feedback. Usually because the attention the trialists are paying, but certainly with this consortium in the last couple of years, the trials are in these parts of the world are improving. We've got a great trial site in Portugal and Skye. We're getting some good feedback on Skye in Portugal and in Spain also. But it's always worth a trial of a small amount of material wherever you're wanting to grow it. But I think, well, based on the background genetics, there's nothing to suggest that they won't do well in these sites. So it's encouraging, but I would definitely encourage a smaller trial first before you put in a big lot of material.
And we have another question, sticking with the international theme, about Ireland. Is there any progress in obtaining these plants? Would they be available in Northern Ireland or indeed in the Republic of Ireland?
The licensed propagators that they're available from are from Europe and the UK. So there's no reason for them not to be available. We don't have a propagator in Ireland, unfortunately, but you should be able to get material into the country.
So you can contact them through the propagators you mentioned and listed earlier on, just to get them across the water, across the pond to Ireland.
Yes, please. And if there's any problems, contact myself or Leslie Beaton, who's the project manager of the programme and deals with all the trialling and testing and commercialisation of the material.
Okay, we'll deal now with yields. Our question here, are all the trials results that you've presented based upon single cropping year yields? And how do Skye, Lewis and Glenmore, if planting's carried on through for several years after planting, so how do they fare? So, well, two parts to that question. Are they all based on single cropping year yields, or do they cross into separate year seasons?
Yes, the results that are included in these slides were from the breeding plots last year in both the summer crop and the autumn crop, and those were planted excuse me, in 2019, and the primocanes gave an initial crop in the autumn of 2019, and this was the subsequent crop the following summer, which was last summer, and then again in the autumn. So the plants are 2 years old.
Okay, I hope that answers the question. Just trying to pick out some questions on the same theme here. Just picking up on the Northern Ireland issue. Keelings, somebody's contacted us to say Keelings have a dedicated research and development area and they would welcome your selections. So that's something you might want to pick up with on later on. Just picking up on yields and double cropping for a minute. One question that I had was, we know traditionally with primocane varieties, if you double crop them, the autumn crop starts usually a bit later than it would otherwise do if you just took it as an autumn crop. Is that, how much of a disadvantage is that for Skye? You know, is it going to push it back too late, and are we losing a lot of fruit in the autumn by doing it that way?
We certainly lose a lot of fruit in the autumn by doing that with Skye, although last season, because of COVID reasons, we couldn't get the tunnels covered until late June. So the autumn season really was quite late, but the summer season was probably on time because of the nice warm weather we had. But the autumn crop had a summer season of dull weather with a late cover on the tunnels, so it was a little bit later than it had been the previous 2 years. this year we're going to put some plug plants into our demonstration tunnel and of Skye and Lewis just to grow up the autumn crop. But we will still have long cane from last year to look at the summer crop also. So that's one of the questions we'd like answered. It would be nice to know the difference in a warmer climate also, or to have more data back from a warmer climate to see how it compares. But yes, we had a lot of green fruit left over at the end of October last year.
Okay, okay, there's a question here coming through about shade tolerance. I mean, we know that raspberry actually in nature enjoys dappled shade, doesn't it, around the margins of woodland. But there's a question here coming out specifically, which of any of these new varieties you've talked about would be fairly shade tolerant? Would it be true to say all of them are?
I'm guessing it's not tested except for the lack of sunshine in Scotland last year. It hasn't really been tested.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, the point I made was that it's that by nature they quite like dappled shade, don't they? So you would hope that they would all perform reasonably well in shade. And as you say, if they performed well in east, I know that east of Scotland gets more sunshine than the west of Scotland does, but nonetheless, not as high sunlight levels there as some areas. Okay, we're getting lots of questions in about pest and disease. You mentioned earlier on that about two-spotted spider mite, botrytis and mildew were priorities. Obviously, there are an awful lot of other pests out there and diseases. Particularly, I'm thinking of aphids, capsids, and leaf-curling midge, which tend to be, we are told at AHDB, these pests are quite serious, and there are fewer and fewer aphicides available on the market. So first of all, let's deal with aphids. Question is that's been posed here: do Skye and Lewis have the A10 gene for the large raspberry aphid, and you know, is that there, or are you using any other new markers for aphid resistance?
We're not using any markers for aphid resistance, and Skye and Lewis both have A10, but I mean, we're well aware that the resistance breaking strain is out there, so I'm not sure how well A10 will hold up. Unfortunately, A10 doesn't give resistance to any other aphid species either, so aphids other than the large raspberry aphids are definitely a bugbear in the breeding programme, I would guess, for growers as well. So yeah, some more work on aphids and non-colonising aphids would be interesting to do. But we came up with these 3 pests to focus on based on feedback from the industry partners.
Okay, that's useful to know. Louise, as chair of the consortium, how high do you rate the importance of pest and disease resistance? Because it seems to me, with the diminishing number of agrochemicals that we've got at our disposal, the most opportunistic way of resolving that problem is through breeding and genetics. So how high is it on your priority list?
Well, absolutely, Scott. And the focus over the last few years has been dealing with the phytophthora problem, of which the number of chemicals available has significantly decreased, and there have been no resistant sources. So I think now we're seeing that research, basic science research done at James Hutton, feeding through into the breeding programme. We are now widening the net. As you say, there are less actives available and more need for growers. And we have worked closely with yourselves and Rachel and Katia to come up with that list, linking those priorities with what we know is in the genetics of the breeding programme and can be accessed quickly. But we do have Nikki always has an eye on any potential standout varieties with resistance, and we will be utilising those as quickly as we can.
Good. Well, that's excellent, and I'm sure events like this will impress upon you, because we're getting lots of questions about pest and disease. But before I take anything else on that, there's a question on crumble, and you mentioned crumbly fruit, Nikki. I'm well aware that your colleague Julie Graham and her colleagues have been identifying genetic markers for crumbly fruit. First question is, how much crumble have you seen in these new varieties, or have you seen any?
Well, so far, Scott, I haven't seen any crumble in Skye, Lewis or Glenmore. What we have seen is split fruit in the tunnels, which we always assume or associate with irrigation and different fluctuations in root pressure.
When you say split fruit, do you mean where the plug is actually splitting, so you're getting a double fruit developing?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we see it a little bit more in Lewis in some production systems. And I don't know if this is going to be the new crumbly fruit, but it'd be interesting to investigate this phenomenon more. And there's definitely varietal differences. Definitely, we didn't see it in Skye, and you can probably see it in Glenmore in the glass house after some warm conditions. But we have seen it in Lewis in the tunnel early season and later on in the season.
Okay.
But if this is down to irrigation, it should be something that could be considered fixing.
Again, maybe a question for Louise. How soon will the new genes that Julie and her team at James Hutton Institute have identified, how soon can they be incorporated into the breeding programme, or are they already there?
Well, we're fast tracking everything that comes out of Julie's programme. Obviously, the markers need validation, and we need to make sure that they deliver what we envisage they will. And Nikki has a number of mapping populations which make that easy to do. But we're also screening our varieties now for a number of markers, as Nikki outlined, which is a really exciting development. I think Luca's work in helping to identify a marker for crumbly fruit is a real breakthrough, because this has been a challenge for the industry for a number of years, and being able to select potential new varieties that don't have the tendency for crumbly fruit is a really important step forward. And we are very grateful that the AHDB supported Luca on his PhD, and also the additional piece of a couple of months that converted that work into something that was really usable for the programme. So very exciting times, I think, Scott.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's happening quickly. I'm going to turn back to pest and disease again. A series of questions on pest and disease. First of all, two-spotted spider mite. How susceptible are Skye and Lewis to two-spotted spider mite? How much information have you got so far on that, Nikki?
We've seen two-spot spider mite in both Skye and Lewis, and on just about every other primocane variety in our demonstration tunnel, but they're definitely in varying degrees of intensity. I would say Skye was less susceptible than Lewis in both of the reps in our demonstration tunnel, but probably no worse than Kwanzaa or Quayle or Amara, which is our controls in that tunnel.
Okay, well, that interest grows from the southern climes of the UK and further south in Europe, because obviously two-spotted spider mite is a massive problem for a lot of primocane varieties. Sticking with Skye and Lewis and pests, raspberry cane midge and blackberry leaf midge. Again, is there any knowledge? How much knowledge is there on their susceptibility to those?
I don't think we'll have leaf midge on site at the Institute that I'm aware of, but cane midge we've certainly got plenty of. It was actually a real problem in our seedling plot last year, interestingly, but we haven't really put that much pressure on cane midge in where they are in the breeding plots. If we moved them into a different field, we'd probably find out a little bit more about it and its susceptibility, because we do have a field that was the original inoculation site that Stuart Gordon used back in the day, and that was the plot that threw out lots of damage to our seedlings last year.
Okay.
And it'd be interesting to see, but
I think there'd be particular interest with double cropping with Skye, because when you double crop raspberries, they tend to be that much more susceptible, because of course you're getting more than one generation, and then you're getting multiple sites where they can lay their eggs within old canes, new canes, cane stubs, and so on. So it's a perfect breeding ground for them when you do double cropping. So it'd be really interesting to keep an eye on that over the next year or two. Okay, some more questions coming in on pests and disease. Just trying to pick these ones out. Yeah, let's turn to root rot now. Nikki, should one expect the root rot resistance to be a resistance that is easily broken down? How robust is that resistance?
Well, so far, the selections with the marker that we see with good resistance in the field, the resistance does seem to be holding up, and we've left plots in for longer than the 4 years that we would normally give a breeding plot. So I think these extra years are a good indicator of how well the material's holding up. In terms of the resistance breaking down, we're probably not that sure. Certainly Glenmore at the moment in the soil, the infested soil where we tested it, I mean, there was not a symptom on any of the reps in that plantation. We have to, with every generation that we make with the root rot marker, there's a danger of losing the linkage of resistance. So we do have bait tests with some pot tests in the glasshouse with deliberate infestation. So we do still test the marker from time to time as it comes through generations of crossing, just to make sure we're not losing anything, which we think we probably will do eventually. But some of the root rot work that's going on at the Institute will help focus that marker down a little bit more, so we'll have more information on the marker in the future, or plants with the marker, or even plants without the marker.
Okay, let's switch to raspberry bushy dwarf virus. Has the susceptibility of Skye and Lewis to RBDV been established, bearing in mind that several of the current commercial primocane fruiting cultivars are susceptible to both the UK and the resistance breaking strain of raspberry bushy dwarf virus? How much knowledge have you got on that so far?
I'm not sure about the RB strain. In terms of raspberry bushy dwarf, based on the fact that we bring it in for crossing and new trials on a regular basis, the plants have been testing negative. So they appear to have been free from RBDV for at least 3-4 years at a time, and more in the case of Glenmore. In the plots at the Institute, we've got plenty of RBDV that gets brought into the plots, the breeding plots, and it's really important that we screen our parent plants, because we always come up with positives. But off the top of my head, I don't remember Skye and Lewis testing positive for RBDV, which doesn't mean there's any kind of resistance in there, but they don't seem super sensitive like some other genotypes that we have.
Yeah, and we've just picked up another question here, or comment, coming back to cane midge. Does the rind of the primocane of Lewis and Skye readily split to provide good cane midge laying sites? Because obviously that's a crucial factor, because in the past varieties like Glenclover and Glenmoy had the mother and father of all splits, and that's why we used to have such big problems with that pest.
Neither are particularly splitty. Glenmore, I would say, is probably slightly more so than either Skye or Lewis. I would have to check my notes on that one. off the top of my head, not obviously so, but I think it's something that we'll look into in the next couple of seasons as we see more, as we have more trials, breeding trials, and as we see more results from the on-farm trials. It'll be something that we'll take note of.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. We've just run over a little bit. We aim to finish at 5. There are a couple more questions, and I don't want to stifle the discussion and conversation. I think we can just go a little bit longer and try and see through these questions because I think they're important. Coming back to the issue of crumbly fruit, somebody's looking for clarification on this. We spoke about plug splitting to cause that. I think the question here is just trying to differentiate between that and crumbly fruit. Are we seeing, or do we think that the irrigation is creating the crumbliness, or I think that's what we're saying at the moment, rather than an inherent genetic problem.
Yeah, I think Scott Bucher's work has done a lot to show about the hormone signalling involved in crumbly fruit, and then being able to link that back to markers, which I think is Nikki is trying to say is something different from perhaps an irrigation issue.
Yeah, okay, well hopefully that clears that up for the questioner. I think probably one more question here. I just find it. Here we go. This is an unusual question for today's world about mechanical harvesting. Would it be possible to put together a range of advanced selections for large commercial trialing for specifically for machine harvesting?
Well, I mean, we concentrated for years on machine harvesting, as Louise described earlier on, and we have a lot of those good traits, such as easy plugged off the receptacle, good display of fruit, thorn-free genotypes, nice upright habit. So I think they'd be worth testing if someone wanted to put into a trial to test these. Unfortunately, we don't test any of our breeding selections on site anymore. We still have a machine harvester, we still have an old tractor pulled Corvan on site, but our focus has been on other things over the last few years, and sadly we don't have any processors in the consortium at the moment. But they're good traits. They're very economical traits that we like to keep in the germplasm. So yes, I would definitely be interested in testing selections for machine harvestability.
Presumably funding permitting, of course. So if there's anybody else out there who wants to put funding into this, I'm sure Louise would be delighted to hear it. I'm conscious of time. I think we need to draw this to a close. There may be one or two late questions, but nonetheless, I think let's draw this to close. We've worked Nikki extremely hard. What I would say, Louise, in summary, is that we have come a long way. I think in the 30 years that I've been involved with this industry, I'm just staggered by the comparison and contrast between today's breeding program and how much is involved with that and what was being done 30 years ago. I'm not being disingenuous to 30 years ago, but the technology has moved on so far. And it seems to me, listening to Nikki, that we really are encompassing and involving all the latest technology that we possibly can to deliver new and improved varieties. Is that fair to say?
I think so, Scott. I mean, you and I remember, we won't say how many years ago, when we used to go to the open evenings to taste varieties at James Hutton, and how, as an ex-retailer, I have to say how impressed I am today about the focus on consumer eating great quality, great looking fruit that still delivers for the industry in terms of pickability, and all these challenges that have come around on the horizon, and the ones that we can see in the not so distant future, the challenges around robotic picking. We are making sure that we deliver the fundamentals, but adding all these additional bits that the industry is either needs now or is going to need in the future. So yes, it's come an awful long way, Scott.
Good. And the final comment I'm just going to pick up on is Fruit for the Future, which is the event that the James Hutton Institute runs every summer. Nikki, maybe you're not the right person to ask this question to, but is there are there encouraging signs that the normal regular event will take place where people are allowed to come on site this year, or is that too soon to say?
Oh, I hope so, but it's a bit soon to say, but I'll speak to the organisers and we'll definitely keep you posted.
I know that all the big fruit shows and fruit events that are going on around the country this year, everybody, all the organisers are hoping above all else that they can actually get people onto site this year. But I suppose that there's a lot of water to flow under the bridge before final decisions can be made. But I'm sure that information will be available on the James Hutton Institute website. So please do have a look there. Let's draw this to a close. Thank you so much to Louise and to Nikki for giving up your time today and for chatting about all of this and sharing your knowledge with us. And I'm sure you've enthused our audience out there. So thank you. Thank you all to all our listeners as well. I hope you've managed to learn a bit more about Glenmore, Skye and Lewis and some of the other new selections that are coming out from the UK Raspberry Breeding Programme. For those of you that are interested in basis and erosive points, don't forget that if you haven't yet submitted those to us, please do so. The email address is there in front of you, maya.cultivar@ahdb.org.uk. Any other late questions can be submitted to me, and I'll be very happy to pass them on to Nikki or to Louise. And don't forget that a recording of today's webinar will be available on our AHDB website at that address, or even if you just search for AHDB Horticulture webinars, it'll take you to that site. So to draw to a conclusion today, we hope you've enjoyed it. Do look out for future horticulture webinars on our website, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.